When I first went to Guantanamo Bay, I thought that the big challenge in the post-9/11 era was torture. And I've changed my mind, and I say that having spent last week writing 230 pages about one of my clients, Ahmed Rabbani, and the 48 separate torture methods he went through. When we conflate national security with political embarrassment, that's when we get in the deepest trouble. And I'll tell you a couple of stories just about how I gradually, too slowly, came to this conclusion. The first time I ever went to Guantanamo Bay, I met Moazzam Begg, who many of you will know is one of the British prisoners in Guantanamo. And I talked to him for 3 days, and everything that he said to me was classified, and I was not allowed to reveal that to anyone without running it through the censors. And so I had to fly to Washington, my notes came to Washington, and I typed them up, and it was 30 pages of medieval torture that poor man had been through. Though he had also described 2 homicides in Basram Air Force Base, and there were 3 pages of psychological impact. I've represented, probably 400 or 500 people on death row, and I've had a certain experience in that regard, not to mention my own psychiatric foibles. So there were 3 pages of the suffering that Moazzam was facing in Guantanamo Bay on the basis of what he'd been through. So I type all this up in the secret facility there, and I can only tell you this because it came out later. I submitted it to the classification officers, very nice people, and they classified everything top secret, that none of it could come out. And I said, come on, you guys, you've got to be kidding me. The first 26 pages are about his torture. And they said, oh yeah, well that's classified because that reveals the methods and means of our interrogation techniques. Oh yeah, right, but what about the next 2 pages, which reflect you murdering people? Presumably that's not a method of interrogation. And the guy just smirked at me and said, yes it is. That you can imagine the impact on the people being interrogated of 2 people dying in front of them. So then I say, well, what about this stuff about my clients' psychiatric issues as a result of all this madness that you people have been doing? And he said, oh, well, that we're classifying because it would violate his privacy to have that revealed. Now, this is total madness, right? And, there was a principle that Joe Margulis, one of the 3 of us who brought the first case against Guantanamo, and Joe was one of the others, and Joe said that if we open it up to public inspection, they will close it down, because what's going on there is just so unbelievably embarrassing that they'll close it down. This is all crazy. And that's been the principle of everything we've tried to do in Guantanamo, and we've tried to do it totally legitimately, because you've got to follow the rules to change them. Much as I would love to bust my death row clients out in a helicopter, you just can't carry on representing people that way, so you have to follow the rules. And, in Moazzam's case, what I did was I wrote a letter to Tony Blair that was captioned, Dear Tony, obviously we're big mates, and it said, in re methods of torture being applied by your friends in the Bush administration against British nationals. Then I detailed the torture for a couple of pages, and then I signed off anything not in this letter when it gets to you has been censored because your friends don't want you to know about it, love Clive. And they censored, of course, everything except the top line and the last line. And we published that on the front page of a prestigious British newspaper, and let people's imaginations run riot. And it was so embarrassing to the US government that they changed that rule and allowed some of the torture evidence to come out. But when I saw, one of the charges, of course, against Julian Assange is the leak of the documents about 800, actually 780 prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. And all of those you will find on the website of the New York Times in what they refer to as the New York Times Guantanamo docket. And I've actually complained to the New York Times that they shouldn't put it up there, because it's all defamatory nonsense. These are the pages of the fantasies that come from the US interrogators about the very worst things they could imagine that my clients could possibly have ever done. I would never reveal the name of an agent or even the snitches who snitch on my clients in Guantanamo, because why would we do that? Why would we humiliate people? But look at what they do. they revealed on one of my clients, Binyan Mohammed, that he was, this was John Ashcroft interrupted a press conference in Moscow to say that Binyan Mohammed had been involved in a nuclear bomb plot to blow up a nuclear bomb in downtown New York. Well, if that's true, that's bad news. If it's false, it couldn't get any more defamatory. I spent a long time representing Binyan. They wanted to execute him initially. And I gradually tracked back where that came from. I asked him, I said, Binyan, did you ever talk to them about nuclear weapons? He said, yeah, I did. They tortured me, and indeed at one point they took a razor blade to his genitals every 2 weeks for a year and a half in Morocco. And he said, I did say that I had read about how to build a nuclear bomb, and this is what I read, and it was in a magazine, that you put your uranium in a bucket. Don't put all your uranium in one bucket, because you want to keep some to one side. But then you spin it round your head for 45 minutes. That's called a centrifuge, and that separates the uranium-235 from the uranium-239, and then you've got a bomb. That's what I told them. Now, this was a spoof that I read in a magazine that came out of Florida. So I tracked back the woman who wrote that article in 1974, and she was horrified that her article had been the basis of the nuclear bomb plot. So should the government be allowed to tell those lies? I think the legal term among us lawyers is total bullshit, right? About weak people who everyone hates, who are tarred as terrorists. Should they be allowed to do that? And if not, what do we do to stop them? Is there a way that we can refute that by having fewer of these secrets? And the other thing I just wanted to tell you is this. So in the leak that Julian Assange is meant to have done from WikiLeaks, which, while it's on the New York Times website, is still deemed classified top secret by the United States, so don't say you looked at it. In that, there's a 13-page document about one of my guys called Yunus Chakuri, and they tar him as the leader of this terrorist group in Morocco, which amazingly only has a French name. I mean, what self-respecting Islamic terrorist would only call your terrorist group by a colonial name? Again, it turns out to be total bullshit, but the 13 pages that they have there have all the snitches who say these things about him. And I get to see the other side. I get to see what's really in all of these interrogations. And so, for example, one of the snitches in there was interrogated for 90 minutes, an hour and a half. In one interrogation, he informed on 92 prisoners, and his testimony was the basis for keeping 92 people in Guantanamo Bay. That's more than one person a minute. But one of the big sources in there was a chap who was actually the original leak of the Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction with Al-Qaeda nonsense. And I'm not going to name him, although unfortunately you can see it all there in the material, because I got this declassified, right? We had a mechanism where I could get my response to their 13-page rubbish declassified. And the documents we have that have been now declassified, which I can share with you all, which I did in the Times Literary Supplement, as a matter of fact. The 1,811 pages. So for each of their one page that Julian Assange is meant to have leaked, I had 150 pages showing what rubbish it was. And I'm going to tell you just one totally off-color story because it amused me. But this is just by way of illustration, and there are thousands of them. One of the guys who snitched on my client said in one of the documents that I read years ago, and I couldn't tell anyone because I was obeying the rules. But he said that he was, helping the Americans because he needed to get some help from the Americans. And so the interrogator says, well, what help do you need from us? And he says, well, I've got a little problem, and I really need your help, so I need you to get me to America so I can have help there. And the interrogator says, what's your problem? And he says, and it's in the document that's there, he says, well, I have a very small penis. And the interrogator says, yeah. And he says, yeah, and I'd like to be taken to America to have penis enlargement surgery. Would you like to look? And at that point, the interrogator thankfully says no. Now, look, I feel sorry for this guy, but the fact that this is the quality of the material, and it's far worse than that, I tell you just because you'll remember that story, because it's a typical off-color sort of story that I tend to tell. But there are hundreds of others like that, and what terrifies me and I see this every day, is that we are saying that stuff like that, I don't want to reveal his name, but I do want you to know that that's the reason that this guy was being held in Guantanamo Bay, and there are still people there today. I've still got 7 of the last 23 nobodies there, and they're still being held on the basis of this drivel. So I think the real question we should be asking in terms of power here is not the power of hackers, it's the power of governments that have enormous power to do really bad things to individuals. The reason I do death penalty cases is there is no imbalance in my worldview between the power and hatred, quite like when the government of one country says of an individual, you know, we hate you so much, we think you're such a bad dude, that we're going to ritually execute you as a sacrifice to some mythological god of deterrence. There's nothing quite like that. And, you know, really whether, you know, I have sympathy with the hacked off people and so forth, but I did write to that inquiry about whether we shouldn't really be looking at the people who aren't famous actors, who can't defend themselves, where the government is leaking stuff that is incredibly more damaging than anything that was leaked through those newspapers, and yet there's no response because the government then classifies it. That's my problem. That's the one I think that Julian Assange's case really revealed.